Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles. Quick announcement before we get underway. Those of you who play on the EU server, or who have been attempting to play on the EU server over the recent week while we were suffering from some pretty nasty server issues, will be, well, hopefully happy to hear that Wargaming have announced that for anybody who was affected, i.e. anybody who played at least one battle between the 5th of January and the 20th of January, will be compensated with 2 days of World of Warships premium account time and 2 Belle Epoque containers. Also, every clan on the EU will receive 2,000 oil to compensate them for their lost earnings. And with that announcement out of the way, let's get on with the carnage. This is Efato in, well, yep, it's once again the USS Salem. I realise my last World of Warships video was the USS Salem, so I don't really plan to go into much detail about what makes this ship different from its sister ship at Tier 10, the USS Des Moines. Suffice to say that it's basically pretty much a carbon copy of the Des Moines with a couple of important differences. The first major difference is the surveillance radar consumable. Basically, it's just not very good. To all intents and purposes, it's a Tier 7 US cruiser radar consumable rather than a Tier 10 US cruiser radar consumable. The range isn't good, and it doesn't last very long. To make up for that, the Salem does receive an enhanced damage repair consumable, which is capable of regenerating an awful lot of health, and is also capable of regenerating 33% rather than 10% of citadel damage. And it's that heal which is going to be very important during the course of this battle for Efato in the USS Salem. He's divisioned up with 2 teammates, one in the frankly terrifying Japanese Tier 10 destroyer, the Harugumo, which I haven't unlocked yet, although I do have the Kitakaze, and it's almost as scary. And his other division mate is in the now unavailable, unless you're lucky enough to get it in a loot box, USS Missouri, the premium Tier 9 US Navy battleship, which also has a radar, one that's significantly better than the one carried by the Salem. To begin with, they're heading out to the flank, Capture Point Charlie, where an enemy Missouri has been spotted, and the Harugumo over there may have been contemplating attempting to at least try for a sneaky cap of Bravo in the middle, but that's when the Moskva gets spotted, and Russian radar is no joke. It doesn't last as long as American radar, but it has significantly longer range, and with a Moskva that close to the cap, there's no way the Harugumo should even contemplate straying into the cap circle, because he will just get radared and shot to bits. And this is in fact a perfect example of the very sort of thing that I'm talking about. They knew there was an enemy destroyer in Bravo because it started to change colour, the Missouri popped his radar, and that Shimakaze is about to have a very, very bad day. I mean, he manages to go undetected because he was at the extreme limit of radar range, but he lost a massive chunk of his health, suffered multiple crits to his modules, and even worse, his torpedoes have all been spotted by the Harugumo. Now, the Harugumo has been counter-radared by the Moskva, and he's been forced to duck into cover behind the island there, but he almost certainly had that exit strategy planned before he made that move. Now, while the Shimakaze hasn't been fully chased out of the cap, or possibly there's another enemy destroyer in there, the cap attempt did not go too well for him. He lost far too much health. None of those torpedoes should hit anything because they've all been spotted. And this is something that you see surprisingly often in higher tier games, with destroyers, because that's what they've learned to do at Tier 4, 5, 6 and 7, just rushing straight for the cap, thinking that they're going to get, at worst, into a gunfight with an enemy destroyer, because they're not used to radar. Now, I don't know if it was the Shimakaze coming back for a second attempt, because he's the only destroyer that's been spotted so far. It may have been him, it may be that there are other enemy destroyers in Bravo, but the enemy team have managed to flip it and take control. However, quickly, just checking, make sure I haven't spoken too soon, but no, none of those torpedoes are going to hit anybody. That would have been embarrassing, not just for me. However, as I was saying, Efato's team are fighting for possession of Alpha and Charlie, and it looks like they're going to take Alpha without too many problems, and in fact they have, although whether they can hold on to it is a different matter, but Charlie is hotly contested, and Efato is starting to attract an awful lot of fire. So he does the smart thing, he stops shooting, turns around, and he disengages. Now I just want to draw your attention to the map, particularly Control Point Bravo, because Poseidon 1971 in the Harugumo is attempting to take control back, and something fairly critical is about to happen. There were in fact 2 Shimikazes over there. The Harugumo has just run into another one. Now because we're not observing this part of the battle directly, we're only looking at it from the minimap, here's what happens. He's requesting fire at the second Shimikaze while he turns his guns on the first Shimikaze to the north, because he was the one that we saw earlier and was on low health, and sinks in with his guns. Now he's at a point-blank range duel with the second Shimikaze, and they both torpedo each other. So, good news, bad news situation. The team have now lost their Harugumo, but the good news is he did at least manage to take care of 2 enemy tier 10 destroyers, so it wasn't a terrible trade. Those are the only 2 ships that Efato's team have managed to sink so far, and they're down 2 destroyers of their own and a battleship. They've also lost the Iowa, who was up ahead of Efato here, way too far ahead, realised that he'd overextended, attempted to turn and disengage, and in the process gave his broadside to a Grosser Kurfürst, a Zhao, a Masashi, a Moskva and a Missouri, with fairly predictable results. Battleship players, I realise you're all getting sick and tired of taking shit from your team for sitting on the map border trying to snipe at long range until you're the last one left alive on your team with your full health bar intact. But that doesn't mean your team are going to thank you for charging straight into the teeth of an overwhelming enemy force without any consideration for how you're going to get out of there alive or what good you're going to do while you're in there. If you could try to find some kind of medium ground between these 2 extremes, you'll probably find that both yourself and your team are going to be a lot more effective, and certainly a lot happier. So, with the enemy team in possession of Bravo and Charlie and starting to build up a fairly impressive points lead, Efato is raining high explosive fire down on the enemy Missouri over there, and they're almost certainly going to kill him. However, any celebrations are almost certainly going to be premature, because in yet another example of seriously overextending yourself, the Henri here, the French tier 10 heavy cruiser, has gotten way too far ahead of the rest of his team, which is very easy to do in a cruiser as fast as that, and when he realised his mistake and turned around, he got himself deleted in a crossfire from the enemy Des Moines. So, RNGesus giveth, and RNGesus taketh away. Meanwhile, the fight for control of Bravo and Charlie is, well, it's very much up for grabs. But what we're going to see happen now is something that seems to happen with monotonous regularity at every tier of gameplay, not just high tiers like this. To a lesser degree, the Grosser Kurfürst, who was giving broadside up there, was an example of it, but prime examples, well, that Minotaur and that Shimikaze over there. And what I'm talking about here is an enemy team who are winning, as this team clearly are. They're ahead on points, they're ahead on ships, and they're ahead on caps. But for some reason they get it into their heads that they're just not quite winning hard enough. So for no good reason, they suddenly start pushing forward. You don't have to take risks like that Minotaur when you're winning, because you're winning. Efato's team are the ones who have to take risks like that Minotaur, because they're losing. And if they don't push forward, they're going to lose. The enemy team should be taking advantage of the fact that they're ahead on points, ships and caps, and taking cover behind the islands and farming damage on Efato's team as they are forced to push forward and expose themselves to fire like that Minotaur. And this is exactly how teams snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Rather than just taking the win, consolidating what they have, they seem to be unable to prevent themselves from continuing to push forward and expose themselves to the kind of risks that they really don't need to be taking. Up until now, I couldn't really see Efato's team managing a successful push up through Charlie. But suddenly it's looking like they might actually be able to pull it off. I mean, that Grosser Kurfürst has taken a ferocious beating. Although the Yamato on Efato's team has managed to get himself killed as well. So it's very much still up for grabs, despite the enemy team appearing to crumble suddenly around Charlie because they just couldn't stop themselves from trying to win harder. The outcome of this game is still very much up for grabs, although the enemy team do still have the advantage. And Efato's team do definitely need to push. And it's starting to look, because Efato is in hot pursuit of this Grosser Kurfürst and he's desperately trying to finish him off. But nobody else on his team appears to be in any rush to try to push up and take control of Charlie or help him dispose of this Grosser Kurfürst as well. And perhaps if the Missouri, Hindenburg, Zhao and Republique down to the south had bothered to push up with Efato, they'd have been able to finish that Grosse Kerr first off. In fact, they almost certainly would have, before he managed to escape into the Cyclone. However, the fires are still burning, and Efato is very shortly going to earn himself the Witherer Award. The Cyclone, of course, is a bit of a double-edged sword. There's the Witherer Award, because while he can no longer see the Grosse Kerr first, the Grosse Kerr first can no longer see him, which means that Efato is able to slip into the cap unobserved and start flipping it. With the Cyclone now in full effect, this is where things start to get very, very dangerous. Maximum visibility is restricted to a range of 8 kilometers. Now the Salem's radar, while it's not very good, has a range of 8.49 kilometers, but it only lasts 25 seconds. So while technically the radar will allow you to spot, identify and shoot targets beyond the maximum visibility range in the Cyclone, unless you have good reason to suspect that there is an enemy ship nearby, you can very easily waste the radar for no good reason, because it only lasts 25 seconds. And with visibility restricted to 8 kilometers, that means the first time you're going to see, for example, an enemy Yamato is when he's 8 kilometers away from you. That's not necessarily a good thing if you're in a Yamato, because lots of ships have torpedoes. Not the Salem, but lots of other ships do. And the Yamato's turrets do turn very slowly. But it can be equally pants-wetting if you're in a Salem, if a Japanese super heavy battleship armed with 18-inch guns suddenly appears out of the depths of the Cyclone, 8 kilometers away, off your starboard beam. Oh my god. Oh shit, there go his secondaries. Get behind the island. Oh crap, and he's got Isaroko Yamamoto as the cap. Holy shit, that was close. That's the kind of brown alert moment that happens all the time when you're fighting in a Cyclone. Oh, enemy Shimakaze spotted. Again, brown alert moment, although you have to expect that the Shimakaze, he's probably going to die. But did he get his torpedoes away? Well, I can't think of any good reason why he wouldn't. Now, we've got the island between ourselves and the Yamato, but there are almost certainly torpedoes on the way. Now, Efato can dodge the torpedoes just by reversing, and that's also going to keep the island between himself and the Yamato, because he's proceeding around to the left-hand side of the island and having a bit of a brown trouser moment for himself, because the Hindenburg's managed to get his torpedoes away. And the Hindenburg has got a brown alert as well, because he's now found himself the meat in an Axis sandwich, with the Grosse Kerr first on one side and a Yamato on the other. He's got his torpedoes away against the Grosse Kerr first, and Efato has the armour-piercing loaded for that big, fat, juicy German broadside, and he's got him. Well, that's a bit of a relief. Once again, however, the celebrations are short-lived, because while they have managed to nail the Grosse Kerr first, it looks like the Yamato managed to dodge most, if not all, of the Hindenburg's torpedoes. The Hindenburg took a ferocious chunking, and that Hindenburg and Efato here in the mostly full health Salem are now the only 2 ships left alive on their team. And Efato is busy yelling furious orders into the voice pipe to get the chief engineer to throw more stokers into the boilers in order to build up enough steam to get around this island and assist that Hindenburg in disposing of this Yamato before the Yamato arranges for Efato to be the last ship remaining on his team. And it looked for a second as if they might actually be able to pull it off, until a swift barrage of 16-inch high explosive shells whistles across the screen, which can only mean that the Conqueror has arrived. And they do manage to finish off the Yamato. Unfortunately, with the Hindenburg burning like that, I believe the technical term for his situation is well and truly buggered. And there's the Conqueror, who is of course firing high explosive, which is more than enough to finish off a Hindenburg in that state. Now the Conqueror is burning a little himself, but if there's one thing that we all know and respect about Conqueror players, is that the overwhelming majority of them are completely unaware that the guns on their ship can actually fire armour-piercing ammunition. 16-inch armour-piercing ammunition, I hasten to remind you, which is entirely capable of overmatching the 27mm bows of the Salem and citadeling him from the front. But it's a Conqueror, so he's not going to be firing any armor-piercing ammunition. However, he is at least capable of moderate levels of intelligent thought, because he appears to have suddenly realised that, hang on, that's the last ship on the enemy team, there are 3 of us. I can ram him. And Efato sees this one coming. And while the Salem is nowhere near as nippy as a Minotaur, he's only just able. Oh, and by the way, that was an armor-piercing salvo from the Musashi. Yes, player 3 has just entered the match. Now, he's sort of managed to outturn the Conqueror's turrets. And he's cleared the barrels of the high explosive, and he's now switched to armor-piercing, as he did take a nasty chunk of damage from the Conqueror there. But now he's unloading armor-piercing into the Conqueror's broadside. And the Conqueror is well and truly buggered. Let's not celebrate just yet, however, because the Musashi was shooting at him. And player 4 is about to enter the match in the shape of the enemy Des Moines. And this I cannot figure out. When the Des Moines could have citadeled him because he was showing broadside, the Des Moines is firing high explosive. He instantly switches to the armor piercing, but it's too late because Efato is now angled. Now the AP salvo does give the Des Moines the advantage here because he managed to knock out Efato's forward turret, so Efato's only effectively firing back here with 3 guns. There's a high explosive salvo. A few more of those would have given Efato serious problems, but the Des Moines switches back to armor piercing and continues to do very little damage with it. The Musashi, over on the flank, manages to score 1 hit, but it's not a citadel, and the Des Moines thinks he's got Efato on the ropes. But that's when Efato plays his trump card. The one big positive difference between the Salem and the Des Moines is the Salem's super heal, and he's managed to buy himself back about half of his hit points, which came just in the nick of time, as he does take a fairly substantial chunk of damage there from the Des Moines, but he now has the advantage. The Des Moines burning, 1 more salvo will finish him off, and there it is, and that just leaves the Musashi. But he only has 2,600 health, and it's a Musashi. I mean, it has the Yamato's 18-inch guns. If the Conqueror with its 16-inch guns can overmatch his 27mm bows, the Musashi will have no problem doing so. But first it has to actually hit him. And it can't, because it's sailed too close and too far around the side of the island. Its 2 front turrets can't actually fire without hitting the rocks. The rear turret might be able to, but Efato has no such limitations, which means that in defiance of the odds and against all expectations, the Musashi is also well and truly buggered. In fact, that's what Dasher was actually saying there. That was the direct literal translation from the Russian. You are well and truly buggered, my son. Efato in the USS Salem. Over 300,000 damage done. Damn, son. Well played. What a game. And I hope you lot enjoyed it too, because that's it for today. In the meantime, as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.